My father always told me that power was the only currency that mattered in this world. Love, he would sneer, swirling his wine in the dimly lit hall of our manor, is the lie that weak men tell themselves to justify their failures. And so I, Valen Ashmore, was raised in the shadow of that singular truth. That power, in all its forms, was the ultimate pursuit. But what my father never told me, what no one ever mentioned, was how empty power could be when it was inherited, not earned. As the youngest son of Lord Ashmore, I had everything a man could want: wealth, land, respect. I was promised a life of ease, of luxury. But as I grew older, it all felt like shackles, chains designed to keep me locked in a gilded cage, forever bound to a destiny that was written for me long before I drew my first breath. I spent my days training with the finest swordsmen, learning the art of politics from my father's advisors, and studying the arcane history of our bloodline. It was meant to mold me into a future lord, a master over men. But with each passing year, the weight of expectation grew heavier, pressing down on my shoulders until it became difficult to breathe. I watched my elder brothers take to it with ease, slipping into their roles as if they had been born for it, while I stood on the periphery, a ghost in my own life. Is this it? I would wonder, staring out over the lands that would one day be mine. Is this all there is? The rumors started when I was 20. It began as hushed whispers among the servants, tales of livestock found drained of blood in the nearby villages, of strange figures seen wandering the forests at night, their eyes glowing red in the darkness. My father dismissed it as nonsense, the product of overactive imaginations, but I saw the way his hand tightened around his goblet, the way his eyes flickered with something close to fear. And that was the first crack. For the first time, I saw my father as something less than invincible, and it lit a fire within me. "What do you know of the vampire?" I had asked my tutor one afternoon, while we stood in the library poring over ancient texts. The old man's face had turned ashen, his eyes darting around as if the very walls might betray him. "Nothing, my lord. They are tales for children, nothing more." But I knew better. I had seen the truth in the way his hands shook as he turned the pages, the way he refused to meet my eyes. I began to listen, truly listen, to the whispers that spread through the manor like wildfire. They spoke of an ancient creature that dwelled in the mountains beyond our lands, a being older than the very stones themselves. It fed on the blood of the living, they said, and those who ventured too close to its lair were never seen again. Power, they whispered. It possessed a power beyond mortal comprehension. And for the first time in my life, I felt that old, familiar emptiness begin to fade. I tried to ignore it at first, tried to banish the thoughts of this creature from my mind, but they lingered, haunting me like a shadow. It became an obsession, a gnawing hunger that grew with each passing day. I wanted, needed to understand, to see it with my own eyes, to know if there was truly something out there that could break the chains that bound me. It was during one of my father's feasts that I made up my mind. The hall was filled with laughter and music, the air thick with the scent of roasted meats and spiced wine. I watched as my brothers spoke of treaties and alliances, of land that would be acquired and enemies that would be crushed, their voices tinged with the arrogance of men who had never tasted defeat. And as I sat there, staring into my untouched goblet, I realized I could not live this life. I couldn't be like them, content to rule over a kingdom of dust, to inherit a crown that held no meaning. That night, as the moon hung high in the sky, I left the manor. I wore no armor, carried no sword, only a dagger strapped to my thigh and a lantern to light my way. The road to the mountains was treacherous, winding through dense forests and narrow passes. It took hours, the darkness pressing in on all sides, but I felt no fear. There was something about the night, about the way the shadows moved, that made me feel alive. The whispers grew louder the closer I came to the mountain's peak. They spoke of death, of pain, of power that could shatter the heavens themselves. And with each step, I felt the pull, an invisible thread that drew me deeper into the heart of the darkness. I stumbled upon the cave just as the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon. It was hidden, tucked away behind a wall of overgrown ivy, the entrance little more than a jagged slit in the rock. But as I stood before it, staring into the inky blackness that lay beyond. I knew I had found it. This is it, I thought, a shiver running down my spine. This is where it begins. I stepped inside, and the air changed. It grew colder, thicker, pressing against my skin like a living thing. The darkness was absolute, swallowing the light from my lantern. But I didn't turn back. I couldn't. I felt drawn forward, pulled deeper into the cave, until I saw it. A figure, shrouded in shadow, stood at the far end of the chamber. It was tall, impossibly so, with eyes that glowed a deep, blood red in the darkness. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, and when it spoke, its voice echoed through the cave, ancient and otherworldly. "You seek power," it said, and the words wrapped around me, sending a shiver down my spine. "Why?" I swallowed, the taste of fear thick on my tongue. "Because," I whispered, "I am tired of being less." The creature laughed, a low, rumbling sound that reverberated through the cave. "You are but a child," it said, "a mortal bound by the chains of men. What makes you think you deserve power?" I stepped forward, my heart pounding in my chest, and met its gaze. "Because I will not be chained," I said, the words leaving my lips before I could stop them. "I will not be a puppet to fate, to my father, to anyone. I want more." The creature studied me for a moment, and I felt its gaze pierce through me, stripping away the layers until there was nothing left but the raw, burning desire that had brought me here. "There is a price," it said finally, and I felt the temperature drop, the air growing colder, sharper. "A price you may not be willing to pay." I didn't hesitate. "Tell me." It stepped forward, and I felt my heart skip a beat as it reached out, one long, clawed finger tracing the line of my jaw. "You must first understand death," it whispered, "before you can understand power. Are you willing to kill for what you seek?" I thought of my father, of the chains he had bound me with, of the endless nights spent dreaming of something more. And I nodded. "Yes." The creature's lips curled into a smile, and I felt its breath against my skin, cold and sweet. "Then your journey begins, Valen Ashmore," it said. "And when it ends, you will be reborn." I felt a sharp pain in my wrist, and when I looked down, I saw the blood pooling there, dripping onto the ground. The creature's eyes flared, and I felt its hunger, felt the darkness wrap around me, pulling me deeper until there was nothing left but the sound of my own heartbeat. And then, as quickly as it began, it was over. The creature stepped back, its eyes still glowing, and I felt something shift within me, something cold, something hungry. "Return to your home," it said, its voice echoing through the cave, "and prepare yourself. The path to power is drenched in blood." I nodded, turning to leave, but as I stepped into the light of dawn, I couldn't help but smile. For the first time in my life, I felt alive. When I returned to the manor, dawn had barely begun to paint the sky in shades of gray. The air was thick with mist, swirling around my feet as I made my way down the familiar path, my mind still reeling from what had transpired in that cave. I felt different. It wasn't just the blood dripping from the wound on my wrist, or the chill that had settled deep into my bones. It was as if something had awakened inside me, something dark and hungry, whispering to me in a voice that felt both foreign and intimately my own. I entered the manor quietly, slipping through the servants' entrance like a thief. The corridors were empty, the household still lost in slumber. I made my way to my chambers, careful not to draw attention, but my mind was racing, replaying the vampire's words over and over again. "You must first understand death before you can understand power." What did that mean? What was I supposed to do? I barely slept that day, pacing the length of my room, the hunger gnawing at me, growing stronger with each passing hour. My hand kept drifting to the wound on my wrist, still seeping blood, but now cold and sticky, the scent of it filling the air. I felt something stir within me whenever I touched it, a spark of something dark and potent that made my heart race. By the time night fell, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I needed answers. I needed to feed. I found myself in the courtyard, staring up at the full moon, its light pale and cold against the black sky. My breath misted in the air, and I could feel the night wrapping around me, embracing me like a long-lost lover. I felt alive, more alive than I ever had before, and yet, there was a gnawing emptiness, a hunger that refused to be sated. And then I saw him, my brother, Alexander, stepping out from the manor, his face illuminated by the faint glow of the lantern he carried. He was the oldest of us, the heir to our father's empire, and he moved with a grace and confidence that had always eluded me. He was everything I was supposed to be, everything I wanted to be. He spotted me standing there, and for a moment, his expression softened. "Valen," he called, walking over to me. "What are you doing out here? You've been gone for days. Father is furious." "Let him be," I replied, my voice colder than I intended. I needed time to think. He sighed, running a hand through his hair, and I could see the weariness etched into his features. "You can't keep doing this," he said quietly, running off, defying him at every turn. "One day, he's going to—" "Kill me?" I interrupted, a smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. "I doubt it." "Why?" Alexander's voice was sharp, his eyes narrowing. "Why do you do this, Valen? Why can't you just accept your place?" My place. The words echoed in my mind, and I felt something snap. "Because I refuse to be nothing," I hissed, stepping closer, my heart pounding in my ears. "I refuse to be another cog in this machine, to live my life according to someone else's design. I want more, Alexander. I want everything." He took a step back, his eyes widening, and I could see the fear creeping into his gaze. "What happened to you?" he whispered. "What did you do?" "I found what I was looking for," I replied, my voice low, trembling with barely contained rage. "And now I'm going to take what's mine." Before he could react, I lunged, driving him to the ground, my hand closing around his throat. He struggled, his fingers clawing at my wrist, but I was stronger now, faster, more than I had ever been before. I could see the panic in his eyes, the way his chest heaved as he tried to draw breath. And I felt a thrill race through me, hotter than anything I had ever felt. "Valen," he gasped, his voice strangled. "Please, don't." But I didn't hear him. All I could hear was the pounding of his heart, the rush of blood through his veins. It was intoxicating. And as I stared down at him, I felt my teeth ache, my vision tinging with red. I leaned in, my lips brushing against his ear. "You always looked down on me," I whispered, my voice barely more than a growl. "You always thought you were better than me. But now—" I paused, letting the words hang in the air. "Now, I'll show you what true power feels like." And then I bit down. His blood flooded my mouth, hot and metallic, and I moaned, the taste of it setting my nerves on fire. He struggled, thrashing beneath me, but I held him still, drinking deeper, feeling his life flow into me, becoming a part of me. I felt his pulse falter, felt his strength ebb away, and I drank, and drank, until there was nothing left. When I finally pulled away, he was still. His eyes stared up at me, glassy and unseeing, and I felt a shudder run through me. I had done it. I had taken his life, drained him dry, and I felt powerful. And yet, the hunger remained. I staggered back, wiping the blood from my lips, my hands trembling. The world around me seemed sharper, clearer, the sounds and scents more vivid than ever before. I could feel the pulse of the earth beneath my feet, hear the whisper of the wind in the trees, and it felt like I was seeing everything for the first time. But in that moment, as I stared down at my brother's lifeless body, I felt something else. Regret. Sorrow. Pain. I had killed him, murdered him in cold blood, and for what? Power? Freedom? Was it worth it? I didn't have an answer. I didn't have time to find one. I turned and fled, running through the forest, the shadows wrapping around me, guiding me back to the cave. My heart was pounding, my mind racing, and the taste of blood still lingered on my tongue. sweet and bitter all at once. When I reached the cave, I fell to my knees, panting, my body trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. The vampire was waiting, its eyes glowing in the darkness, and as I looked up, I saw the faintest hint of a smile on its lips. "Good," it murmured, stepping forward, its movements fluid, predatory. "You've tasted death." "I killed him," I choked out, the words scraping against my throat. "I killed my own brother." "And how did it feel?" the vampire asked, tilting its head. "Did you feel powerful? Did you feel alive?" I nodded, my vision blurring with tears I refused to shed. "Yes." "Then you are ready." It knelt before me, one clawed hand tilting my head to the side, exposing my throat. I felt its breath against my skin, cold and sweet, and I shivered, fear and anticipation coursing through me. "This is the moment," it whispered, its voice like silk. "This is where you are reborn." And then I felt it. Pain, sharp and blinding, as its fangs sank into my flesh. I tried to scream, to pull away, but it held me fast, its grip unyielding. My blood poured from the wound, and I felt my strength ebbing, felt the darkness closing in. But then, just as I thought I might slip away, I felt it. Warmth, flooding through my veins, filling the void, replacing the cold with something fierce and burning. The vampire pulled away, and I collapsed to the ground, gasping, my heart thundering in my chest. "Drink," it commanded, and I felt its wrist press against my lips, warm and wet. And I drank, tasting something sweeter than blood, something that burned as it flowed through me. And as I drank, I felt my heart slow, felt the life drain from my body, and when I finally pulled away, I was no longer Valen Ashmore, son of a lord. I was something more. When I awoke, the world was different. The cave that had once been a tomb now felt like a womb, dark and comforting, its air thick with the scent of earth and blood. I could hear everything. The faint drip of water seeping from the stone above, the scurrying of tiny creatures in the shadows, and my own heartbeat. Or rather, the absence of it. I was dead, and yet, I had never felt more alive. My entire body thrummed with power, every nerve singing with a fire that burned hotter than anything I had ever known. The wounds I'd carried from the journey, the cuts and bruises, had all vanished, replaced by smooth, pale skin that seemed to glow in the darkness. I ran my tongue over my teeth, felt the sharpness of my fangs, and felt a shiver run through me. I had become what I had always feared, always desired. I was a monster. "Good," the vampire's voice came from the shadows, smooth and soft like silk sliding over skin. "You are awake." I turned, and there he stood, my sire, watching me with those glowing eyes that now felt so familiar. He seemed smaller than I remembered, less imposing, and I realized with a start that I was looking down at him. I had grown, my muscles thicker, my frame larger, as if my very body had shifted to accommodate this new power. "Stand," he commanded, and I did. I rose to my feet, feeling the strength that surged through me, the way my limbs moved with a grace and speed that was almost unnatural. "How do you feel?" he asked, tilting his head, and I could see the hunger in his eyes, the way he watched me like a predator watching its prey. "I feel strong," I murmured, and the words vibrated in my throat, deeper, more resonant than before. "I feel alive." The vampire nodded. "Then you are ready." "Ready for what?" "To kill," he said simply, and gestured toward the cave entrance. "There is a village nearby. You will go there. You will feed." I took a step back, my lips pulling back over my fangs. I can't." "You can," he cut me off, his voice sharp as a blade. "And you will. You are a vampire now, Valen. You are a predator, and it is time you learned what that means." The hunger roared in me, twisting in my gut, gnawing at my insides. I tried to fight it, tried to push it down, but it only grew stronger, more insistent. I could feel my mouth watering, could smell the blood that still lingered on the air, and I knew, deep down, that he was right. I had to feed. Without another word, I turned and fled the cave, the night air hitting me like a physical blow. It was colder than I remembered, sharper, and the moon hung low in the sky, its light casting long, twisted shadows over the landscape. I moved faster than I ever had before, my feet barely touching the ground, the trees whipping past me in a blur. The village came into view, its thatched rooftops glowing faintly in the moonlight, and I felt my heart, or what was left of it, skip a beat. I could smell them, even from this distance, their sweat, their fear, the warm, coppery tang of their blood. I stepped into the village, silent as death, my eyes scanning the rows of cottages, the flickering lamplight spilling from open windows. And then I saw them. A man, no older than I had been, leading his horse to the water trough, his back turned to me. I moved without thinking, faster than I thought possible, and before he even had time to scream, I grabbed him by the throat, lifting him off his feet. His eyes bulged, his hands clawing at my wrist, and I felt a thrill of power rush through me, hotter than anything I had ever known. I didn't give him a chance to beg. I drove my fangs into his throat, felt the skin split beneath my teeth, and his blood, hot and thick, flooded into my mouth. It was exquisite, better than anything I had ever tasted, and I drank deeply, feeling his life pour into me, feeling his strength become mine. He struggled, his body convulsing in my grip, but I held him still, drinking until there was nothing left, until his heart gave one final, desperate flutter and went still. I let his body fall to the ground, blood still dripping from my lips, and looked up. They were staring at me. The villagers. Men, women, children. They stood frozen, their eyes wide, their mouths open, and I could see the horror, the disbelief etched into their features. And then, one of them screamed. The sound shattered the silence, and in an instant, they were running, fleeing into the night, their footsteps pounding against the earth. I could have let them go. I should have let them go. But the hunger was still there, gnawing at my insides, and I wanted more. I moved through the village like a shadow, faster than their eyes could follow. I tore through them, ripping out throats, breaking bones, drinking deeply from every body I touched. Blood sprayed across the ground, splattering against the walls, pooling in the dirt, and I reveled in it, feeling it soak into my skin, feeling it pulse through my veins. I caught a man by the leg, dragging him across the ground as he screamed, and drove my teeth into his calf, ripping out chunks of flesh. I threw him aside, his blood staining the ground, and grabbed a woman by the hair, snapping her neck with a flick of my wrist. I tore into her throat, drinking deeply, feeling the warmth flood my mouth, and I laughed as the blood ran down my chin as their screams filled the air. The last one was a child, no older than 8, standing frozen in the doorway of a cottage, her eyes wide with terror. I took a step toward her, my body drenched in blood, and for a moment, I hesitated. But then I remembered the hunger, the need, and I lunged. Her blood was sweeter than the others, tinged with innocence, and I drained her dry, dropping her lifeless body to the ground as I stood there, panting, my chest heaving, my veins singing with power. The village lay in ruins around me, the bodies of the dead strewn across the ground, their blood soaking into the earth. And I stood amidst it all, my fangs bared, my eyes glowing in the darkness. "You see now," the vampire said, his voice coming from the shadows, and I turned to face him. "This is what you are. This is what you will become." I felt the blood pulsing through me, felt the power that came with it, and I knew, with a certainty that burned hotter than any fire, that I would never be the same. "I'm more," I whispered, staring down at my blood-soaked hands. "I am everything." And as I stood there, surrounded by the bodies of the fallen, I knew that this was only the beginning. I would take this power, I would bend it to my will, and nothing would ever stand in my way again.